Undecember is a mobile ARPG with some MMO-like features, basic ones. At the time of recording, it has a 10-act story campaign with additional story added later, a rotating seasonal system unique to a handful of live service ARPGs on the market already. Just yesterday, at time of recording, I have played this game for 11 hours in one day, and I'm here to report to you what my first impressions were, what I think of it, and I guess if I would recommend it or not to you. Starting with the character creator, is very basic but serviceable. You have what you need with some presets, some hair and color options. It's simple enough to get through. It actually has gender options, which among Western and Western ported games is becoming surprisingly rare, so it's nice to see a mobile game of all things kind of putting in the extra effort that devs seem to not like to do anymore. The core gameplay feels like a solid ARPG. It has more of a weighted feel to it than some of its competitors. It's not hyper fast or mobile unless you get a specific buff. There is great audio feedback in the game that kind of lets you know how successful your attacks are, if they hit, how many of them hit, and hit what and when. There's just some great responsiveness there built into the audio cues, and not a lot of visual clutter either. There are 5 main skills that you will use on your hotbar. Regular attacks are too weak to use, so in fact you will just be using exclusively skills which are mostly spammable. This creates an interesting situation that you don't really see in any other ARPG, at least not one that I've played, where all of your skills, all of your attacks will use mana, and any toggleable effects that you put on yourself will increase that cost of mana. So you're going to be constantly chugging MP potions, and HP doesn't regen by default, so you'll be constantly chugging those as well. More on that in a minute. But your main attack can be automated as well, so this adds an aspect of autoplay, I guess typical for a mobile game. Mouse selection and all menus definitely feel converted from mobile, with a lot of inconsistencies and some things not doing what you'd expect them to do, like in every other, not only ARPG, but I guess PC game in general. So long as you hover over a target, though, you never need to move the mouse again to retain aiming on that one target, even if that target is teleporting all over your screen, which I suppose is a result of this mobile-oriented aiming system. The game has a strange hotbar system that splits in half, where you only get to access 1 through 4, and then you have to go to another tab for 1 through 4 again, for example, or for your skills is Q, W, E, R, and then right click, and then you can hit a button to go to a second one of those. And it's weird that it even does this, because 55% of it, maybe 60% of it, roughly, can be set to automatically use. All potions can be set to automatically use, and a lot of them you're going to want on auto use. It's very Korean in nature for sure, but your HP and MP potions, since you rely on basically chugging them, you definitely want to set up your variables of when they will auto use and pretty much keep them on auto use all the damn time. Even those main attacks that I mentioned can be automated as well, and that's usually what's bound to your right click. This limitation of hotbars makes hybrid builds kind of difficult and forces you down linear paths for character creation, despite a very open-looking character build system filled with many trees and options. Now, when learning how all this works, you're going to have to learn every little bit of it by yourself, and I mean every little bit of it. The tutorial in this game sucks. There's no explanation as to who you are, what you are, or how to do anything really. Maybe some bare bones like glossing over, but it's so bad that they don't even teach you how to attack in the beginning of the game. And tell me, how would you try to attack in an ARPG? Right click, maybe? Or I think more usually left click is not only for move, but usually for attack in this kind of game. Shift left click, so you can attack while in place. Shift does let you attack while in place, but I don't know what it's good for, because left click doesn't attack. In fact, when you start the game, you will actually have to bind your own attack to one of those skills that I mentioned, but the game doesn't tell you this. and it will feel extra weighted in that moment because you won't have access to a dodge, because dodging is a skill that you can choose to have or not, but then separately there's a dodge mechanic based on stats, so it gets kind of weird, very strange. And I am pretty confident a lot of players quit right there at the beginning when they can't figure out how to attack anything. It's very rare, not never before seen, but very rare that I played a game where in the tutorial you have to manually bind your attack, your basic attack, with no instruction whatsoever. And since potions auto-use, you might find yourself just being under attack forever till you run out of potions and end up dying in a loop. I don't know. Thankfully, I figured out what to do before then, but it still took me like 10 minutes of running around getting beat up to figure out what was going on. Now, after the tutorial, you get into the storyline. The storyline is serviceable. Nothing special. Barely anything is explained, as I mentioned. That goes for the story as well. You're more over-provided goals than a journey, at least for the first 2 acts that I have fully completed in one day. There really wasn't any explanation. There's no grander narrative that I've seen to latch on to. It's more just a collection of areas and then reasons of why you would go to those areas, and that's about it. The game's performance is solid. It's fairly well optimized. I don't mean that it runs well on my system. That is not what well optimized means. I mean that the different options scale fairly well, and even the highest options are comparatively easy to run. It is mostly GPU heavy, not CPU heavy, surprisingly. Has the hallmarks of stuttering and jittering associated with the Unreal 4 engine that it is based on, but it is far less problematic than most other Unreal 4 engine games that I've played. The scariest thing is that when you start the game, the anti-cheat has some initialization, like checking that it does, and this sends, at least my CPU into overdrive, nearly doubling my temperatures as it does whatever it's doing. And then having, again, during the actual gameplay, due to how easy this game is on the CPU, the anti-cheat upon launch is so terrifying. I'm kind of like tempted to just leave the game running forever and never close it. Good thing I haven't detected any memory leaks that would convince me to do that. It can consume an entire thread, by the way, while it's doing that initial check. On an 8-core CPU, it uses over 10%. So roughly an entire thread. The graphics themselves look great for a mobile game. Even by PC standards though, the fidelity appears to be well above average for most games that I've played, until you zoom in and see how the resolution of everything is based around you being at max zoom out, which by the way, you can only adjust zoom in cities, so you won't ever notice any of the low resolution details unless you zoom all the way in. And I don't think it scales very well up through higher resolutions, I'm gonna assume, because the game is only like 14, 15 gigs, and if it had like 4K textures and whatnot, then it would be way bigger. The progression in this game is insane, and that might be a good or a bad thing depending on who you are. This game has more ways to advance than I can count, certainly more ways than 99.95% of other games that I played in my entire life, and I've played a lot of games. Learning all of them takes a good couple of hours of effort. The first 2 acts are at least incredibly easy, and so you don't need to really know all of it or be good at it or do it. But I read it gets a lot harder as of Act 5, though I cannot confirm, because in 11 hours I've only completed the first 2 acts. The gear alone is complicated enough that you'll likely spend as much time working on your gear as you do actually going through the zones if you care. Again, it's so easy at the beginning you won't have to. Most loot that you gain is incrementally gained resources used for upgrades for your gear and your skills, rather than actual loot, rather than actual gear as you would expect in most ARPGs ever made, highlighting the offload of work onto min-maxing rather than the usual gear progression that you see in these kinds of games. Hello, it's Rez from the future, recording this to add a clarification of something I realized on day 2 of playing this game, but I need you to really understand it. As you're progressing through the game, your biggest power increases are going to come from getting higher level, higher tier gear in increments. The actual progression that you could dump all of your resources in is very RNG, very random, like a Korean endgame, pretty much. And you can do this from the earliest levels of the game, thus meaning if you waste all your resources, which you probably don't want to, the actual power progression becomes very, very random. It becomes very slow, and it kind of makes the progression of the game feel unrewarding. This is a really big negative, it's probably the biggest negative I've seen in the game, and so I really wanted to nail this down there. The game itself is free to play, so anybody can download this right now off of Steam and even on your phones, for example. However, the cash shop is exactly what you should expect if you hear Korean mobile game with MMO-like features. There are nearly infinite things to spend money on. It is heavily pay to win in nature. You'll be prompted to spend about $200 on newbie-specific things in the first couple of hours, all of which are typically one-offs, but still, you would get a much better deal buying, for example, the 3-game edition of Van Helsing for a couple of bucks on something like G2A, or even on Steam for something like 20 bucks. You get 3 games for a dirt cheap price, 10% or less of what you'd be paying for the newbie specific things on this cash shop. As for the actual MMO related features, they barely exist. There's a guild system, but it's usual mobile affair where most of the players in these guilds do not interact. The chat is dead compared to real PC MMORPGs. The player amount is limited to 50 per guild. That's incredibly low for guild systems in multiplayer games, maybe not on mobile, but I'm a PC gamer. We're looking at this on Steam. As per seemingly usual, this mobile guild affair seems specifically related to exploiting the existence of your fellow player to acquire buffs and currencies and benefits. There really doesn't seem to be a lot of sense of community here, especially since the player base is extremely low at time of recording, with Steam player counts of 500 to 1,000 concurrent across 4 different servers: America, Europe, Asia, and Korea. Yes, Korea has its own, separate to Asia, interestingly. When I look around, there's only even a handful of guilds even open to receiving new players that are even findable, at least on the America server. So realistically, even though this game is played by a lot of players that like MMOs, and even though this game has MMO-like features like guilds, you are only really going to interact with it for buffs. Your chances of finding a new community in this game are minimal. I would not recommend this game if you plan on playing it like a game of that nature. You should look at this game as a very, very expensive single-player game, or a very, very inconvenient one if you're not going to spend the money on all the tabs of storage that provide easily accessible infinite storage for certain items, as that, among other things, are made as inconvenient as possible for you to get you spending, and all the later progression, and really important progression, is based around daily, weekly, and even account logins over seasons and alts to get you playing for as long as is humanly possible. Hopefully this video has been helpful to you. If you want to see me cover, like this, any other games, feel free to leave that in the comments below. Feel free to leave in the comments your experience with this game. But for now, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.